First of all, I want to apologize for this review taking so long. You have no idea how busy I've been lately. But the moment is finally here. And after reviewing the classic NES game, The Legend of Zelda, let's move on to the sequel. Also on the NES, Zelda II, The Adventure of Link. The Legend of Zelda was one of Nintendo's most well-received games of the generation. Over 6.5 million copies sold, and with so much good feedback, people requested a sequel. But little do these people know what they were going to witness. Zelda II, although having 4.38 million copies purchased, was definitely not as well accepted as the first game. Zelda II was a game that fans would either love or extremely hate. The results were a mixed bag. What is it about this game that angered so many people at that time? Well, let's find out. Well, first of all, like Metroid 2, the title screen doesn't give us any summary of the story whatsoever. You're just thrown into the game. So once again, if you were alive at the time, then your only hope would be to look up the manual. The story takes place several years after the events of the first game, with Link now being 16 years old. The King of Hyrule has recently been deceased. For whatever reason, we'll never find out. And the Prince has been searching for the missing Triforce of Courage. Which reminds me, apparently I was wrong about Link having the Triforce of Courage in the first game, which kind of explains to me why there were only 2 pieces at the ending. So I apologize for getting that wrong. But anyway, as it turns out, before the king died, he told Princess Zelda, not the same one from the first game, the location of the Triforce of Courage, and the prince, her brother, befriends a wizard, who used to work for the king and requests that he puts a sleeping spell on Zelda. She refuses to cooperate, and the prince rather suddenly thinks that this is wrong and asks the wizard to stop. But the wizard doesn't listen and decides to cast a spell anyway, killing him as well. Yeah, nice going, jackass. Zelda's nursemaid Impa tells Link that in order to wake her, he needs to take 6 crystals to different places around Hyrule, which will open the gates to the great palace that holds the Triforce of Courage. So that's your main objective. Let's look at the gameplay now. Well, thankfully, as you can see, we still have the ability to save under our name, but as soon as you start the game, you're going to notice a lot of changes. First of all, one of the main things that is criticized a lot in the series is that this game is a side-scroller for the most part. And there are also some RPG elements like magic spells and attack power as well as health. No other later Zelda games would take on this sort of style. Well, except for those horrible CDI games. If I ever get the chance to review them, then I'll go more into depth. But back to Zelda 2. Now there is an overhead view like the first game, but as well as it looking absolutely ugly even for an NES game, you can't exactly attack while in this view. What happens is that these monster icons appear at random, and if one of them touches you, then you're sent to this sort of battle sequence where Ganon's minions try to collect blood from Link to resurrect him. This is where you can also find another RPG factor in the game, because when you kill enemies you earn experience points, which can level up your magic, health, and attack power. However, for some reason you can't go any higher than 8, which is a bummer. The layout of the battle sequence depends on where you met the monsters. There are grassy fields, forests, sand, etc. However, if you stick to this yellow road and get caught by the monsters, then there's nothing there for you to fight, so what's the point? Still, this battle sequence could be worse. It could be like one of the Final Fantasy games where you don't even see the enemies. But hey, they're still fun games to play. But unfortunately, like Final Fantasy, the battling in Zelda 2 gets pretty old quick. Another way to get easy experience is to collect these P bags. I really don't want to know what they contain, but whatever it is, it's certainly helping Link. But of course, the main gimmick, like in the first game, is to collect items in different dungeons and fight a boss at the end of each one in order to place a crystal in one of these tombstones, which also fills up all the experience you need to advance to the next level. Returning from the first game is the candle, the flute, and the raft. From what I can see, the raft works the same as before, but the candle no longer lets you throw fire and burn things, and the flute is only used to get past this giant spider and open up the second to last dungeon. And there's no way to transport yourself around Hyrule, which brings up a big problem. If you die even in the dungeons unlike the first game, then you will always start again where Zelda is. And this, especially in the later stages, will become a huge pain in the ass. Not to mention, this game is hard! Once again, this is nowhere near as hard as Castlevania 3, but my god is it frustrating. And once again, it all boils down to the enemies. I mean, Jesus Christ, are some of them tough. The best example I can think of in terms of hard difficulty is Death Mountain. Boy will you be having fun with this. Not only are there enemies that'll beat you down to the ground, especially these lizards, but this place is also a maze. You've got to take some lucky guesses as to where you're going, because a lot of times you're going to run into a dead end. So overall, if you're going to play Zelda 2, be prepared to die a lot. What the hell is he doing? I hope that's a sword he's holding. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that this is the only time you see Ganon in the entire game.
and let me tell you, you're gonna hear that laugh a lot.
Should I be Porky Pig reject?
As for the other weapons, we've also got the Handy Glove, which allows you to break the rocks in the dungeons. There's the Hammer, that's found in Death Mountain, where you can break the rocks in the overworld as well as bushes. The Boots, which lets Link walk on certain sections of water. And finally there's the Cross, that allows you to see specific invisible enemies. That's pretty much it in terms of new items, and there aren't as many dungeons as the first game either, so in terms of longevity, this game just about loses. Maybe that's a good thing. Now if you thought the first game barely had a map, then take a look at this game, because there isn't one at all. Not even a gray box in a square. So yeah, you might as well be playing the original Metroid. And as for the townspeople, a lot of them have absolutely nothing useful to say. Sorry, I know nothing? Well gee, thanks so much for your help. I'm sure you'll call an ambulance too if I need it. And then there's this guy. I am Error. I am not joking, that's what it says. That has got to be one of the worst mistranslations I have ever seen. Who the hell names their kid Error?
Hi, my name is Link, and I was wondering if you might be able to help me out. I am Error.
In each of the towns, you'll find an old man who will teach you a spell that you can perform. You can turn into a fairy, cast thunder, jump higher, those sort of things. There are also a couple of soldiers you can find who will teach you the up thrust and the down thrust, which I use a lot. But in a nutshell, a large majority of these townspeople are just as useless as the townspeople in Simon's Quest. Don't look into the Death Star or you will die. There's also a woman who invites you to her house so she can heal you, but you never see what's going on in there. Looks like Link's learning a new thrust move, and it's not for his sword. Oh god, ew, ew, ew! Now there's one major aspect I forgot to talk about in the first game, and that was the music. To this day, we all know the main Legend of Zelda tune. It sticks to our heads every time we hear it, and it remains as being one of Nintendo's most recognizable theme tunes. And there were, of course, some other great songs, like in the dungeon and ending. This game's music, on the other hand, is nowhere near as good. And that's probably because it wasn't composed by the same guy as the first game, Koji Kondo. While the tunes certainly aren't bad, they're just nowhere near as memorable as the first game. It also doesn't help that this game suffers the same problem the first game had of having a limited number of tracks to listen to. Some call it laziness, others say it's because of the NES's limitations. But the only song in this game that I recall ever humming to was the boss theme. As for the bosses themselves, they're a hell of a lot more fun to fight than in the first game, and I'm surprised to say that I personally think the challenge is just right. Not too hard, but not too easy. And there's actually a reason as to why you're fighting these bosses. They're supposed to be the King of Hyrule's guardians for the keys to the palace. Which begs the question as to why the Prince of Hyrule can't just tell him what Link is doing so they could probably let him proceed. It seems so easy, all they have to do is just this. Hello, I'd like to go to the Great Palace. Okay.
How hard is that?
This isn't exactly as cryptic as the last game, but it does have its moments. Take this part where you have to use the hammer on a bush to reveal a hidden town, and then when you come across a dead end, if you just happen to use a certain spell at this specific spot, then you'll see a temple come out of the ground where you can get the magical key. So, once again, it was up to Nintendo Power to give you all the answers. But my least favorite part of the game is getting to the Great Palace itself, because this is where you start to realize how unforgiving the knockback is when you get hit. It's the same as Castlevania. No matter how much health you have, if you fall into a pit, you're as good as dead. And traveling to the final area of the game especially shows it. But thankfully, even if you get a game over, you're allowed to restart at the palace. So at last the game cuts us some slack. But you still have to either be insanely good at this dungeon, or you'll have to collect some extra lives because there is no way in hell you're able to survive. This is my other most hated part of the game because some of the enemies are just way too strong, so I just end up spamming the thunder spells just to easily pass through these bird things. But upon getting near the end, we fight the Thunderbird, and if you don't have any magic at all before starting this fight, then you're screwed, because the only way you're able to beat him is that you need to cast the Thunder spell to reveal his face, which you can then stab repeatedly until he's dead. But after defeating him, we finally found the Triforce of Courage, guarded by an old man who challenges Link to one last test. Defeating his own shadow, known as Dark Link, sometimes known as Shadow Link. And god damn is this guy hard! I swear there's no possible way of hitting him if you fight him normally. As far as I'm aware, the only way of defeating Dark Link is cheating. This is a trick a lot of you should know. Crouching in the left corner and constantly pressing the attack button until Dark Link eventually goes away so you can at last obtain the Triforce of Courage. Wait a minute, where did he get the other 2 Triforce pieces? I mean, the Triforce of Power he could have kept from the first game, but how did he get the Triforce of Wisdom? That's not the same Zelda! Screw it, the new Zelda wakes up, thanks you, the curtains come down, and what is going on between these two? If you beat the game, you get to start a new one with the improved stats that you had before, which makes some of the enemies and bosses a lot easier. While I do enjoy Zelda 2, I can definitely see why a lot of people don't like it. It seems that like Castlevania 2 and Super Mario Bros. 2, the developers were too worried about creating the same game as before, just with a different layout. While I'm certainly thankful that they didn't go that route, I would have liked to see a few aspects that were in the first game, like attacking in the overhead view. This is just a case of changing way too much in a sequel, and that is why I'm going to give Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, a 6.7 out of 10, simply standing for a mixed bag. And Nintendo has certainly been taking notes on what gamers liked and disliked for the next game in the series on the Super Nintendo. As we head into the 16-bit era, we're going to look at The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This is Josh Smith from Reviews of Yesteryear, signing off.